Dear you, you were always the one people turned to. When something needed to be done, when someone needed support, when things felt uncertain, your name came up without hesitation. You showed up, you listened, you helped. And because you did it so naturally, no one questioned whether it cost you anything. From the outside, you were visible everywhere, in conversations, in responsibilities, in the quiet spaces where someone needed reliability. But inside, there was a growing feeling that no one was really looking at you. They were looking at what you could provide. You didn't resent them for it. You understood why it happened. You had made yourself useful, dependable, steady. You rarely asked for much, and when you did, you softened the request so it wouldn't feel inconvenient. You learned how to be the kind of person others felt comfortable leaning on. At first, that felt good. It felt like purpose, like belonging, like proof that you mattered. Being needed gave you a place in people's lives, and you held on to that feeling. You told yourself this was connection, that this was what being valued looked like. But over time, something shifted. You noticed that people came to you with their problems, but rarely asked about your inner world. They checked in when they needed something, not when they wanted to understand you. You were included for your function, not your feelings. You didn't say anything. You didn't want to seem ungrateful. You didn't want to disrupt the dynamic. So you stayed quiet and kept doing what you did best. You reassured others. You carried responsibilities. You made space for everyone else. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you began to feel invisible in the very places you were most present. You weren't alone. You were surrounded. But you felt unseen in a way that was hard to explain. It wasn't loneliness in the traditional sense. It was more like being overlooked emotionally, like people saw your role, but not your reality. You wondered if this was just how things worked. If being the strong one meant not being checked on. If being reliable meant not being asked how you were holding up. You told yourself you didn't need that kind of attention anyway. But some nights, when things were quiet, the thought returned, would anyone notice if I stopped being the one who holds everything together? That question scared you, not because you wanted to disappear, but because you weren't sure of the answer. You realized that much of the attention you received was conditional. It depended on what you gave, on how you showed up, on how useful you remained. And that realization hurt more than you expected. You didn't want to be dramatic about it. You didn't want to accuse anyone. You knew people weren't intentionally ignoring you. They simply responded to the version of you that was always available. And because that version rarely asked to be seen, no one learned how. Still, the ache remained. You felt it when no one asked how you were after a long day, when your exhaustion went unnoticed, when your quiet struggles stayed private because you didn't think they belonged in the room. You started to wonder if you had taught people the wrong lesson about you, if you had made yourself so capable that your vulnerability no longer felt visible, if you had become needed but not known. If you're reading this and feeling that slow, familiar tightening in your chest, It's because this experience is deeply human. Many people become essential to others and invisible to themselves at the same time. They are relied on, but rarely reflected. You weren't wrong for being this person. You weren't weak for wanting to be seen. You weren't asking for too much. This letter isn't here to make you pull away from others. It's here to acknowledge the quiet cost of always being needed. To sit with you in the realization that usefulness and visibility are not the same thing. You were present everywhere, but somewhere along the way, you stopped feeling present to yourself, and noticing that is the first moment you truly become visible again. If you go back far enough, you'll see that being needed wasn't something you planned. It was something you learned. Learned in moments when stepping in made things calmer, when helping made situations easier, when taking responsibility created stability in places that felt uncertain. At first, it wasn't about being invisible. It was about being useful. You noticed early on that when you helped, people relaxed. When you listened, tension softened. When you handled things, problems didn't linger. That response mattered to you. It felt like proof that you had a place, that you contributed something meaningful. And in a world that often feels unstable, being useful felt grounding. So you leaned into it. You became the one who checked in. The one who remembered details, the one who stayed calm when others felt overwhelmed. And each time you showed up that way, the pattern reinforced itself. People trusted you. They relied on you. They came to you when things felt heavy, and because you were good at carrying weight, more weight found its way to you. Not because people wanted to burden you, but because you made it look easy. You rarely complained. You rarely asked for help in return. You rarely let your own needs take center stage. So people assumed you didn't have many needs to begin with. They assumed you were fine. They assumed your strength was constant. You may not have noticed when that assumption settled in, but you felt its effects. You felt it when conversations stayed focused on others. When your role was to support, not to share. When people thanked you for being there, but didn't ask what it took for you to be there. You felt it when your exhaustion was met with silence because no one realized it was there. And slowly, something inside you learned to stay quiet too. You told yourself this was normal, that everyone had roles, that this was simply yours. You told yourself you didn't need to be seen to feel connected. That being needed was enough, but being needed isn't the same as being known. Your past self understands now that this pattern also came from care. You didn't want to add to anyone's burden. You didn't want to shift focus back to yourself. You believed that if you stayed strong, others could stay afloat, and that belief became part of how you measured your worth. You felt valuable when you were useful. You felt secure when you were relied on. You felt connected when you were needed. But that connection was one-directional. It flowed outward, and over time the lack of return began to register, not as anger but as emptiness. You might have noticed it as a quiet question forming inside you. If I stopped doing all of this, would anyone still come close? Not because you wanted to disappear, but because you wanted to know whether your presence mattered beyond what you provided. That question is painful. And it's one many people avoid asking, because asking it means confronting the possibility that you've been seen more for your function than for your humanity. But here's the truth your past self has learned. You didn't make a mistake by becoming this person. You adapted to what life asked of you. You filled gaps. You did what made sense in the moments that shaped you. The issue isn't that you became needed. It's that you became only needed. When care flows in one direction for too long, it creates imbalance, not because anyone intends harm, but because habits form, roles solidify. And without interruption, those roles become identities. You weren't invisible because no one cared. You were invisible because you rarely stepped out of the role that kept you visible. And stepping out of that role feels risky. It feels like letting people down. It feels like losing the thing that made you matter. But that fear doesn't come from truth. It comes from conditioning. Your worth was never limited to what you could hold together. Recognizing this doesn't require blame. It requires awareness. Awareness that being needed gave you connection, but also cost you visibility. Awareness that you've been giving from a place that hasn't always been replenished. And awareness is where change begins, not loudly, not suddenly, but gently. You are allowed to want more than usefulness. You are allowed to want to be seen. You are allowed to want connection that goes both ways. This realization doesn't erase who you've been. It expands who you're allowed to be. There will be a moment quiet, almost unremarkable, when you realize you don't need to disappear in order to belong. It won't come as a revelation with fireworks. It will arrive softly, like a thought that doesn't demand your attention, but stays anyway. It might happen when you pause before offering help, when you notice the urge to fix and choose to breathe instead, when you allow someone else to sit with discomfort without rushing in to rescue it. And in that pause, you'll feel something unfamiliar. Relief. You've spent so long being the steady ground beneath everyone else that you forgot you were allowed to stand on your own ground too. You learned to be essential, but not centered. Reliable, but not reflected. And now, gently, you're learning that your value doesn't vanish when you stop performing usefulness. You don't have to withdraw from the world to be seen. You don't have to become distant or cold. You don't have to abandon who you are. You only need to let yourself be included in conversations that aren't about solving problems. Included in care that doesn't require a reason. Included in moments where you're allowed to receive without immediately giving something back. This may feel uncomfortable. At first, you may feel exposed. You may wonder if you're being selfish or dramatic. That voice will show up. It always does when you step out of a role you've lived in for a long time. But that voice isn't truth. It's habit. You are not taking too much by wanting to be seen. You are not asking for too much by needing acknowledgement. You are not weak for wanting connection that goes both ways. If anything, this is strength in a new form, the kind that allows balance. Balance doesn't mean you stop being supportive. It means you stop being the only support. It means you allow others the dignity of showing up too. It means you trust that relationships can handle reciprocity, not just reliability. You might be surprised by what happens when you let yourself be visible. Some people may not know how to respond at first. They're used to a version of you that never asked, that never paused, that never needed. This doesn't mean they don't care. It means the dynamic is changing. Change takes time. But you'll also notice something else. You'll notice moments where someone meets you without being prompted, where care flows toward you without explanation, where you feel recognized not for what you do, but for who you are. Those moments may be small, but they are real, and they are enough to remind you that visibility is possible. You don't need to prove your worth anymore. You don't need to justify your presence. You don't need to earn care through exhaustion. You are allowed to exist without carrying everyone else. Let yourself rest in that truth for a moment. Let it settle into your body. Let your shoulders drop a fraction. Let your breath slow. You don't have to rush into a new identity. You're not replacing who you were. You're expanding who you can be. Some days you'll still fall back into old patterns. You'll notice yourself stepping in too quickly, offering too much, holding too tightly. That doesn't erase your progress. It simply shows you where compassion is still needed, directed inward this time. Each time you choose to check in with yourself before responding to others, you reclaim a small piece of visibility. Each time you allow someone to see you without usefulness attached, you reclaim a small piece of connection. These moments add up. You were never invisible because you lacked presence. You were invisible because you gave it all away. Now, you're learning to keep some of it for yourself. Stay here. Stay with yourself. Let your needs exist without apology. Let your humanity take up space. You don't need to be needed to matter. You already do. Sincerely, you.